It was February 1957, a cold, gray winter day in Fox Chase, a quiet, working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Just off Susquehanna Road, hidden in a patch of brush and trees, a boy lay dead in a cardboard box. He had no name, no identification. No one reported him missing. He would be called the boy in the box. For more than 60 years, the world would not know who he was or who had left him there. It was cold, the kind of cold that settles in the bones and doesn't let go. A February afternoon in Fox Chase, a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Trees stood bare. The sky was heavy. The only sound was the wind brushing against dead leaves and thin branches. This was a place where no one expected anything unusual to happen. But down a back road, Susquehanna Road, something had been left behind. Something small, something silent, something no one could explain. The first person to notice it was a young man checking his muskrat traps. He often walked the area alone, trying to keep out of sight. On that day, his eyes caught something strange, a large, discarded cardboard box sitting just off the road. It had once held a bassinet, the kind used for newborns. He moved closer. Inside was a small figure, wrapped in a thin, checkered blanket. At first, he told no one. He didn't want to get involved. He quietly walked away. The next day, a second young man, a college student driving through the area, spotted the same box. Curiosity got the better of him. When he looked inside, he immediately contacted the police. What they found would shock the entire city. Inside was the body of a young boy, estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old. No clothing, no identification, no shoes, just the blanket and the box. Philadelphia police arrived quickly. They roped off the area and began photographing every angle. Investigators combed through the woods, looking for any sign of who he was or who had left him there. They didn't find tire tracks, they didn't find fingerprints, they didn't find a name. Only the cardboard box from a J.C. Penney bassinet sold months earlier in Upper Darby. It was a clue, but a cold one. The boy's appearance raised even more questions. He was small for his age, much smaller than expected. His hair had been recently cut, but unevenly, as if done in a hurry. There were signs of long-term neglect, and strangely, he had been cleaned and groomed before being left in the woods. It was as if someone wanted to erase who he was, but not entirely forget him. Despite this, no one reported him missing. Not from Philadelphia, not from surrounding towns, not from anywhere. For the detectives, it was the beginning of something bigger than a single case. It was the start of an investigation with no direction, no witnesses, and no identity. A child, between the ages of 4 and 6, placed in the woods with care, but with no clear explanation. No injuries visible from a distance. No immediate evidence of who he was, or how he ended up there. The media dubbed him the boy in the box. To the public, it was a tragic headline. To the detectives, it became a life's work, and to a grieving city, it became a haunting reminder. Sometimes even the smallest lives leave the deepest mysteries. The child was brought in from the woods to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office the day after he was found. It was now up to science, to careful observation and forensics, to uncover who he was and what had happened to him. He couldn't speak for himself, but the details on his body, they could. The lead pathologist was Dr. Joseph Spellman, a seasoned city medical examiner. He'd seen countless cases, but this one stood apart. Before the exam even began, it was clear. The boy was unusually small. He measured 40.5 inches in height and weighed just 30 pounds. That's about the size of a healthy toddler, not a child between 4 and 6, which is what his bone development suggested. The boy was severely underweight and had almost no body fat. Malnutrition was likely part of his daily life, not a sudden event. He had no signs of dental care and no fillings. His teeth were in relatively good condition, but misaligned. There was no evidence of dental intervention, something not uncommon for children in poverty at the time. His hair had been recently cut, but not with care. It looked rushed, uneven, and likely done at home. Hair clippings were still stuck to his neck and torso. Some investigators believed the haircut happened after death, possibly to make him look less recognizable or to remove a distinctive hairstyle. Was someone trying to change how he looked? His fingernails were clean and neatly trimmed. His body had been washed. That detail stood out, because even though he was malnourished and had signs of long-term mistreatment, someone had cleaned him up before placing him in that box. It was an unusual contrast. A child who had clearly been suffering, but who was groomed in death. There were visible bruises on his legs, back, and head. Some were fresh. Others were older, already fading, meaning they occurred over time, not all at once. The most serious injury was on the right side of his skull, near the ear. It appeared to be the most probable cause of death, the one that ended his life, but it's unclear if it was intentional or accidental. His bones were otherwise unbroken. His lungs were clear. There were no signs of drowning or evidence of recent illness. The examination also showed 3 small scars, one on his left ankle, possibly from a previous medical procedure or infection, one in his groin area, one faint healed mark under his chin. These scars were clean, likely surgical, which meant someone had taken him to a doctor at some point. He had received care, however briefly, in the past. But no clinic, no hospital, no doctor came forward. No one matched his scars or his face to any known patient. His identity remained a blank. Even stranger, in a city as large as Philadelphia, no one had reported a missing boy matching his description. Without a name, without a family, the boy was given one by the press, America's unknown child. And from the start, it wasn't just about how he died. It was about how someone had managed to hide him in plain sight, to raise him, possibly for years in secrecy, to vanish him, without anyone noticing. Dr. Spellman and his team couldn't find any toxic substances in his system. There were no signs of assault, no foreign materials, and no way to estimate how long he'd been deceased, though investigators believed it was no more than a few days before discovery. In the end, the findings left more questions than answers. Who was he? Why wasn't he missed? And who cleaned him, wrapped him in a blanket, and left him in the woods instead of calling for help? The boy's autopsy was over, but the investigation was just beginning, and what came next would ignite one of the most intense, frustrating, and heartbreaking unsolved cases in American history. In most missing person cases, authorities begin with a name, a photo, a last known location. But in this case, they had none of that. So Philadelphia police did something bold for the time. They invited the media in, completely. They collaborated with reporters to get the story out as far and wide as possible. They shared crime scene photos, selectively, autopsy sketches, and even details from the investigation that would usually be kept private. This wasn't just transparency, it was strategy. They plastered his face, or what they believed it looked like, across hundreds of locations. Flyers were printed and posted from coast to coast. Some were even included in gas bills mailed to thousands of homes across Pennsylvania. Imagine getting your utility bill and seeing a child's sketch asking, "Do you know this boy?" It was unprecedented for 1957, and for a brief moment, it worked. The story hit radio shows, nightly news segments, and even national magazines. Walter Winchell, one of the most influential media voices of the era, mentioned it in his broadcasts, giving it national reach. But even with all of that exposure, no name ever came back. In the 1950s, forensics wasn't what it is today. There were no national DNA databases, no high-throughput sequencing, not even standardized child dental records across counties. But investigators did everything they could. They took footprints and fingerprints. Both were run against hospital birth records and juvenile databases. They examined scars, moles, and vaccination marks to match against medical records. They even used clay facial reconstruction, years ahead of its time, to try to humanize the boy and elicit recognition. Still, no one came forward. It wasn't until 1998, over 4 decades later, that forensic science finally caught up. The boy's body was exhumed and tested for mitochondrial DNA, which is passed through the maternal line. It provided a genetic fingerprint, but without a match, it was like having a key without a lock. In 2019, the body was exhumed again, this time for whole genome sequencing. By 2022, that DNA would finally break the silence. We'll get to that in Chapter 5, but for years, it was a waiting game. For more than 60 years, the boy in the box case became a puzzle with missing pieces, pieces that sparked endless theories. Some were based on hard evidence, others came from hunches, a few from pure imagination, but each one reflected something important, a desire to give this child a voice, even if the facts were few. One of the most widely discussed theories was this, that the boy died accidentally in a home where he wasn't supposed to be, and the adults involved panicked, choosing to hide what happened instead of facing consequences. Supporters of this theory point to the fresh haircut, likely done at home, suggesting the boy was under someone's care up until the end. The cleaning of the body, which indicated someone had tried to treat or tend to him. The lack of clothing or personal items, hinting at a hasty decision to remove identifying materials. In this scenario, the people involved may have convinced themselves that covering up the truth was their only option. But no household ever came forward, and no one ever broke the silence. Another theory centered on a nearby foster home, just a short walk from where the boy was found. Investigator Remington Bristow believed the child may have been staying there, legally or informally, and died during an incident that was never reported. He visited the property. He saw a bassinet like the one that may have come in the cardboard box. He saw similar blankets. Even spoke with the family who ran the home. The timeline matched. The distance matched. But there was never enough evidence to connect the boy to the house directly. No records, no admissions, no missing reports filed. Still to this day, some believe this theory holds weight. In the early 2000s, a woman, known only as M, came forward with a deeply detailed story. She claimed that as a child, her mother brought home a boy, not by adoption or birth, but through a private, unregulated arrangement. According to her, the boy lived in the basement, isolated from the outside world. She described incidents that pointed to neglect and emotional harm. One day, she claimed he passed away, and her mother wrapped him in a blanket and left him in the woods. M told investigators that she never knew the boy's real name. She never saw him again. Authorities found her account emotional and strangely consistent with known facts, but there was no way to confirm it. The family had moved, her mother had passed away, and with no hard proof, her story became another theory. Chilling, possible, but unverifiable. Another theory suggested the boy may have traveled with a carnival or a nomadic family, possibly one where records weren't kept and education wasn't consistent. In these environments, children could move from town to town largely unseen by systems like schools, doctors, or social services. It would explain why no one recognized him, why no one reported him missing, and why there was no paper trail. But again, without a name, a location, or someone to confirm this theory, it remained an open possibility. Some theorists, especially in online communities, have raised concerns about the possibility that the boy was moved around outside of formal care systems, that he may have been under the control of people who didn't want him to be seen or identified, for reasons that remain unclear. There's no confirmed evidence of this, and law enforcement has never officially backed the idea. But it does reflect the reality of the time. In the 1950s, reporting standards were limited, background checks were rare, and some children, tragically, slipped through every safety net. There's one theory that isn't really a theory, more of a reflection, that the boy in the box represents a child who was never seen, never documented, never taken to school, never taken to the doctor, never included in census reports. A child whose life, from start to finish, existed outside the systems meant to protect him. If that's the case, there may be no one to name him because no one ever knew him. Each theory points in a different direction. Each one has gaps, and yet, each one tries to answer the same heartbreaking question. How does a child end up like this, and no one says a word? In the next chapter, we move from speculation to science and uncover how a breakthrough in DNA technology would finally begin to unravel the truth. For decades, the boy in the box was the case that haunted Philadelphia. Leads had dried up, witnesses had passed away, and even the most passionate investigators had retired. But time also brought new tools, and in the world of forensic science, one innovation changed everything: genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy is the combination of DNA analysis and family tree research. using online ancestry databases to trace relatives and eventually identify individuals. It's how law enforcement solved the Golden State Killer case in 2018, and it's how dozens of cold cases were cracked in the years that followed. But it's not easy. It takes a viable DNA sample, a team of genealogists, access to millions of DNA profiles from public databases, and a whole lot of patience. In 2019, the body of the boy in the box was exhumed for the second time. This time, they weren't looking for fingerprints or dental records. They were looking for something deeper, a full DNA profile. It took years of testing, refining, and retesting. The remains had degraded. The sample was difficult, but the forensic team persisted. They eventually got what they needed, a viable DNA sequence that could be uploaded to public genealogy platforms like GeneMatch and Family Tree DNA. From there, things began to move. Genealogists identified distant relatives from the boy's maternal line. These were third and fourth cousins, people who had never heard of this case but had uploaded their DNA for ancestry research. From there, a family tree was painstakingly built backwards. Marriage records, obituaries, census data, immigration papers. Every branch, every name, every date helped tighten the circle. After months of investigation, the tree led to one couple in Philadelphia in the 1950s. A couple who had several children, but only some accounted for. One child had never been registered in school. No birth certificate, no death certificate, just a gap. That child was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Investigators didn't stop there. They were able to locate living relatives on both the maternal and paternal sides of Joseph's family. Carefully, respectfully, they asked for voluntary DNA tests, and those tests confirmed it. Maternal match, paternal match. There was no doubt anymore. The boy in the box had a name. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13, 1953. On December 8, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department held a historic press conference. Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw made the announcement, flanked by detectives, forensic scientists, and members of the media. This is still an active homicide investigation, but we now know his name. He was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The room was silent, emotional. Some reporters were moved to tears. After 65 years, Joseph was no longer a mystery. He was no longer a case number. He was a child, with a name, a birthday, a family history. Many asked, how could a child go missing, and no one say anything for decades? The answer is still unfolding. Authorities have not released the names of Joseph's birth parents, citing privacy and respect for still living individuals. But it's believed that Joseph may never have been formally registered and may have lived outside traditional systems. Not uncommon in that era, especially in situations involving stigma or family secrets. Whatever the circumstances, what matters now is this: he was found, he was named, and he was never forgotten. Today, Joseph has a proper headstone bearing his full name. Strangers still visit him, leave flowers, some leave notes, toys, messages of love. Because Joseph represents more than just a case. He represents every child lost in silence, every person who deserved to be known, every mystery that was never supposed to be solved, but was. The boy in the box is a boy no longer. He is Joseph. And after 65 long years, his story finally has a voice. In the end, Joseph Augustus Zarelli's name was restored. But justice, closure, those are still out of reach. Even with groundbreaking science and decades of police work, the most important question remains: what happened to Joseph? The Philadelphia Police Department has made it clear this is still an open investigation. Detectives now know who he was, but they're still trying to determine how he died and who was responsible. There are leads being re-examined, old tips being re-verified, and people who may have known Joseph now being quietly contacted. But there are challenges. Most individuals connected to the case are elderly or deceased. Many records from the 1950s were lost, incomplete, or never created. And silence, intentional or not, still surrounds much of Joseph's short life. Despite the heartbreak, the boy in the box case has become a teaching moment, a rare example of what persistence and science can achieve. It's now used in forensic science courses and law enforcement training nationwide. How do you keep a cold case alive for 65 years? How do you ethically use genetic genealogy? And how do you respect the victim's story, even when the answers are painful? Joseph's case shows the power of interagency cooperation, public support, and the long memory of investigators who refused to let him be forgotten. This wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about honoring a life. For years, the public had adopted Joseph without knowing his name. People donated for his burial. They wrote poems. They attended vigils. They called him America's unknown child. And when his name was finally revealed, millions of people mourned a boy they never met. It speaks to something deeper, a collective refusal to let any child slip through the cracks. With Joseph's identity confirmed, the story now turns to the questions left behind. Why wasn't his birth ever officially recorded? Where did he live in the months leading up to his death? Who, if anyone, tried to raise him? And most importantly, who failed to protect him? The police may already have pieces of the truth, but they're being cautious, balancing transparency with the privacy of still living individuals. That has led to some criticism, but it also reflects the complex reality of cold cases finally cracking open. Answers may still come, or they may stay buried forever, but the silence has already been broken. Joseph Augustus Zarelli is no longer a nameless mystery. He is a part of American history, a child remembered not just for how his life ended, but for what his story has inspired, a transformation in forensic science, a reminder that no cold case should ever be forgotten, and a quiet vow: every child matters, even after 65 years. If you have any information about Joseph's life or circumstances, please contact the Philadelphia Police Department's Homicide Division. Even one detail could still make a difference. If you're intrigued by unsolved mysteries and chilling cases, check out my playlist, True Crime Murders and Disappearances, for more unsolved cases.